Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us tonight for one of our Book Passage virtual events. We are so pleased to welcome you back to our events. As you all know, we do events live in the store, and we also have these wonderful evening virtual events. So we really thank you for joining us. If you have not attended one of our virtual events, just know that questions will be answered. You can put them in the chat. And we will get them to the authors for the conversation. That'll usually happen in the last part of the event. So again, thank you very much for joining us. Book Passage has a very busy fall and winter schedule. We've got so many incredible authors on the docket. And I am going to mention a few of them because they're so exciting, and we don't want you to miss any of these incredible opportunities that we offer at Book Passage for you to hear these amazing voices. We have on Sunday, September 10th, so that's this coming Sunday at Dominican University in San Rafael, we will be hosting best-selling author James McBride for his new novel, The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store. This event will take place at 2 p.m. in person at Dominican University in San Rafael. This is a great book. It is selling very, very well. It's on the bestseller list. It is just a wonderful novel. For those of you who are familiar with James McBride, you want to pick this one up. It really is a great read. And then on Thursday, September 14th at 4 p.m., we will be welcoming Academy Award-winning actor Matthew McConaughey. That will be in our San Francisco store. It'll be a meet and greet for his new children's book, Just Because. And I have been honored to have a sneak peek at this incredible book. It is absolutely adorable. It is the perfect book for your holiday gift giving. So we really encourage you to come out and get that book. And who doesn't want to get a picture with Matthew McConaughey and say hello to him? I mean, what a great opportunity. So again, that's this Thursday, the September 14th, 4 p.m. in our San Francisco store. All of this is on our calendar on our website, bookpassage.com. We have so many classes. Again, lots and lots of events almost every single day, many on the weekends. So take a look at our calendar, bookpassage.com. We do not want you to miss anything that's coming up. At Book Passage, our mission is to enrich, engage, and inspire. And we are so proud because we have been a Bay Area institution for over 40 years, as well as a family-owned business for over 40 years. Thank you to all of our loyal customers out there. We really hope to be around to serve you for another 40 years. Well, we are so fortunate this evening to present an incredible collection of works by numerous powerhouse authors. Fast Fallen Women introduces 75 new essays about the dangerous and enthralling ways women fall and how they get back up on their feet. More deft, more decisive, more daring than ever. With new works from Amy Tan, Jane Smiley, Caroline Levitt, and many more, Fast Fallen Women illuminates women's courage, curiosity, and wit. Gina Barreca has appeared on 2020, The Today Show, CNN, and yes, she has been on Oprah to discuss gender, power, politics, and humor. Her earlier books include the best-selling They Used to Call Me Snow White, But I Drifted, It's Not That I'm Bitter, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying About Visible Panty Lines and Conquered the World. Her books have been translated into many languages. Gina's work has appeared in most major publications, including the New York Times, the Independent of London, the Harvard Business Review. Her blog for Psychology Today has well over 7.5 million, I'm going to say that again, 7.5 million views. And Gina is also the winner of the University of Connecticut's highest award for excellence in teaching. And I'm sure that is a very personal honor for her. That's quite an achievement. Gina is joined this evening by Pulitzer Prize winning author Jane Smiley. Jane is the author of numerous novels that we all know and love. 1,000 Acres, which was awarded the Pulitzer Prize, The Last 100 Years Trilogy, Some Luck, Early Warning, and Golden Age. She's author of several works of nonfiction and books for young adults as well. A member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters, she has also received the Penn Center USA Lifetime Achievement Award for Literature. She lives in Northern California, and she is a good friend of Book Passage. We see her pretty often coming into the store, and we are so honored to welcome her back to our virtual stage this evening. So please join me in welcoming these two incredible, talented authors to our Book Passage virtual stage for your enjoyment, Gina Barreca and Jane Smiley.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure and a delight and an honor to be here. And Jane, thank you very much for joining all of us and for being in, I'm going to hold up the book because I have no shame, in Fast Fallen Women, where the cover, which I think is just terrific, was painted by one of the contributors who was getting her PhD, which she received last year, in the art department as a fine artist, Kelsey Tynek, who also has a wonderful piece about the pressures and prospects of failure of a fine artist, because she's out there selling her work and getting her work out. But I love that, she painted the woman rising. Fallen women, she's going up those stairs, which I think is great. But Jane Smiley, I have, again, I was saying that I was putting on like necklaces I thought you would like. I was like, I have such a crush on your work, and I admire you so deeply, and I have taught your books both to the undergraduates, to the graduate students who fall under my aegis at UConn. I love 1,000 Acres is something I teach regularly. I loved Dangerous Business, which is about fallen women, right? It's about two prostitutes who go solve, and one of the lines from the book, and I really want to talk about the idea of fallen women with you. I mean, not only the brilliant essay that you wrote for this collection and for the first Fast Women collection, the Fast Funny Women, but in A Dangerous Business, the line is, everyone knows this is a dangerous business, but between you and me, being a woman is a dangerous business, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I think that should be on a t-shirt. I think it should be like on tea towels sold at TJ Maxx. I mean, this should be given to girls at, their confirmation or bat mitzvahs or whatever. I mean, like, being a woman is a dangerous business, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise is just amazing. And then your nonfiction in The Questions That Matter Most, which is the most recent book. I mean, it's brilliant. And I think I see every reason for everyone to go to Book Passage and buy all of your books. But I would also, as somebody who also understands this, that we can have our beautiful dog-eared copies of Moo, which I've taught in a class, about the the big land grant school, like the one that I teach at, but and 1,000 Acres. But it's the new business, the new books like A Dangerous Business and The Questions That Matter Most that we also need to get off the shelves. So that is everybody's immediate shopping.
Yeah,
that's what we need to do. So how did you become a dangerous woman, Jane Smiley? When did you know? You talk about in various essays, you talk about your childhood, and in the essay in Fast Fallen Women, you talk about realizing that you probably had ADD as a kid. Is that?
Well, I probably did. Yeah, my son was diagnosed with ADD, and when I watched how he did how he made his way through school, I remembered that on my 4th grade report card, the teacher had written, "She only does what she wants to do." And I think my teacher thought that was a bad thing, but fortunately, I don't think my mom did. And she was pretty good at letting me do what I wanted to do. That doesn't mean I didn't get out of the house and away from any surveillance sometimes, but not all that much.
Right. Now that is, I mean, it's to read again, having read so much of your work and knowing something of your biography, it wasn't a shock to think that you were perhaps not one of the March sisters, or if you were a March sister, you would be Jo. That you were not, that you were not going to just sort of put a hand up to her forehead and go gently into that good night. But what was it then? Do you see it as a legacy from your mother that you learned you could do
my mother was, she pretty much did what she wanted to. And one of the things that she did in 1941, was she signed up for the WAC, the Women's Army Corps, secretly. She got my aunt to go with her to wherever it was they signed up. And she signed up, and then she came home and said, bye, I'm off to Europe. And I don't think she knew what she was supposed to do there, but she learned a lot. She spent a lot of time in Paris, certain amount of time. So she was in the WAC for, I think, about 3 years, for the whole length of the war. And one of the things she did when she was in there was she worked on the Army newspaper, and that gave her an idea about what she wanted to do with her life. And so when she came back, she decided to go work for newspapers. So in the early 50s, when I was growing up, she was the women's page editor of the St. Louis Globe-Democrat. And the only thing I didn't respect about her job was that she always had to dress perfectly, which of course she did,
Yes, of course. Yeah, I mean, that is still
my style. That wasn't my
style. But what a legacy, though. But for someone who, again, wrote her own narrative, right?
Yes.
This was a shock to her family, right?
No, it wasn't a shock. I think they were totally happy that she was willing to do that. All the women in our family have been pretty independent for years. Her grandmother, my great-grandmother, came from Norway to St. Paul, Minnesota, on her own when she was about 18 or 19. And this was in the 1880s and early 1890s. And she made her own living sewing dresses. Some of them were quite elegant and beautiful. And she supported herself in that way for years. And we knew it.
Yeah.
So there was never a moment where anybody said, why in the world did she do that? Everybody knew it and respected her for it.
So nobody said this is such a radical difference from the world. I come from this big Italian family where when people ask, it's like, where did you get your sense of humor? It was only because a sense of humor was the only way that you could ever be heard. It was like, as a child, wow. I have an older brother, and we both eat like the Goths are about to invade, like the Vandals are at the gate. But that was because as a child of an immediate family that had a Sunday meal together, like 170 people would come, for Sunday dinner. And wow. If you didn't, almost literally, not quite, but it felt like that. And we would sit at these long refectory tables with benches, not individual chairs. And it was really, survival of the fittest kind of thing. Wow. And people would, if you didn't eat something fast, if you didn't stuff your cheeks like a gerbil, there was an adult hand, like a hairy adult arm of one gender or the other, would come down and go, "You're not going to finish that?" is you going to finish the meatball? You didn't finish the meatball. She doesn't want the meatball. And I'd be like, I want the meatball. I want the cannoli. And there was no opportunity, shall we say, to make oneself heard. And the idea of a woman who would be independent or make her own living or have a voice or tell her own story was sort of both literally and metaphorically unheard of. That women had conversations that were entirely separate from what anything men could hear or be part of. And the idea that a woman could, make her own way, could travel. I mean, the family made, you can trace your family back generations. I come from families where people couldn't write their names on the manifest coming over, but they, but they made the one big trip out of the ship out of Palermo and then never left the block in Brooklyn where they all ended up. There was no sense of adventure. There were, and
I think that my grandmother, my great grandmother, was definitely adventurous, but my grandmother was too. She went to a teacher's school in Idaho because she grew up in Idaho, because that's where my great grandmother and her father lived. And my great grandfather's father, my great grandfather's job was to work to set up various newspapers in Idaho. He was an avid liberal. And in those days, newspapers were set up by political parties. And so they moved around Idaho and he set up various newspapers. And that gave my grandmother a sense that she had to do something too. So she went to a teaching school, a normal school in Idaho. And her job, she was planning to be a teacher, but then she met my grandfather and he won her over. So, but he was adventurous too. So there was no sense that she had to do what she was told, or, she was a sweetheart and but he wasn't demanding or anything like that. So our whole family had this sense of, well, what do I want to do? Okay, I'll do that,
That again, I feel like we get landed with the families that we have, or we emerge from the families that not only from some kind of inevitability, but it's like you get something from them and you decide what they pack the bag for you. And you get to decide later on as you grow up at different phases of life, what out of what they packed for you, you want to keep, and what you can happily leave behind, and to either lighten your load, or what you take with you as an amulet, or that you pack for your own strength later. And it's just is such a different sort of what you carry is such a different sense of things. And the world figures so largely in your works. So many of your works take place in Paris. They take place, you're all over the place. You're in Middle America.
Like to travel. And they like to tell, for me, the best thing about my childhood was that one of the things that they loved to do was tell stories. And they were always positive stories, even though bad things did happen that we kids didn't find out. But they loved to tell stories, and they loved to make us laugh. And what made me laugh was that I would listen to the story and I would enjoy it. And then I'd go in the kitchen for a drink of water or something. And one of the aunts would come in and say, "That's not what really happened.
It's my entire life.
This is what really happened." And that gave me a sense. I later realized that people, and therefore characters in stories and novels, had different points of view and different ways of interpreting things. And that was just automatic to me to understand that our family, everybody had a different point of view, but they told stories and they were willing to accept what the others said.
That's what a loving, compassionate, understanding way of putting it. I write about how my family's full of liars, which I come down to the same thing, but that it is again, I mentioned my brother, who is again an avid, devoted reader of your work, and so was his wife Wendy. And but that I did the Penguin. I edited the Penguin book of Italian American writing. And Publishers Weekly pointed out that in all the books that Publishers Weekly had reviewed, they had never seen a rebuttal to an introduction, because I wrote the introduction to the book, and my brother then wrote a rebuttal to my introduction, saying that my sister is going to tell you this, but she's wrong, because nobody told my sister the truth about anything, because she was the only one in the family who didn't understand that if you heard a story, you were supposed to shut up and not tell that story to everybody you met. And Gina will listen to the stories and then tell them to everybody she meets, because she thinks telling stories are important, and everybody else in the family knows that you have a story, you keep it to yourself. And so it was a different kind of like, I'm listening to the aunts, and I'm so happy to hear you say aunt as opposed to aunt. When I first moved to Connecticut,
Well, in St. Louis, we talk like this and we say aunt.
Aunt, and I tried to say aunt for 3 years. I couldn't do it. I just gave up. I tried to speak slower and to say aunt. And after I just told my students, listen faster, just listen faster and we'll all be fine. And they did. But it is the idea that what do you do with the stories? And in Fast Fallen Women, it's 75 writers talking about the ways of falling. Now, your essay, I mean, you go back to your youth, but then you talk about a literal fall, right?
Yes.
And
on a walk, not right? Downstairs, on a walk.
On a walk. And then
I have to admit that when I was in college, I did fall down the stairs in the college library. And at the staircase came down to a hall, but there was a railing on the other side of the hall, and I didn't fly over the railing. So, and I didn't even hurt myself falling down the stairs, but it's stuck in my mind. And that's the only time I truly ever fell down the stairs.
That's a good thing that you didn't fly over the banister. Sounds like a happy thing. Did someone come to help you? Did anyone witness this?
I think I was alone. I think that I was alone, and the stairs had just been cleaned, so they were very slippery. So I think that's why I fell down the stairs.
You see, I mean, people, and in my family, they would say, you see what happens when you send a woman to the library? She almost kills herself. She's not supposed to be in the library. She's supposed to be in the kitchen. In the kitchen, she wouldn't have hurt herself. She was supposed to be, she would have had an apron on and she would have made sauce. You send her to the library, she almost dies. Doesn't that teach you anything? That's what I would have heard. So would have been a different interpretation of the whole thing. But you talk about that there might be worse ways of going.
Well, when you sent me the request to write an essay for this, I thought, boy, what am I going to talk about? And I've already talked about my sex life so many times, especially in 10 Days in the Hills, and also probably in the trilogy a little bit. And I don't want to talk about that. And then I thought, well, I'm going to talk about the literal idea of falling.
But it just shows that all of the ways you can make a story. Now, I'm just going to go back to, again, your essay for Fast Funny Woman is absolutely wonderful. But one of the funny things that you did for Fast Funny Woman was your bio for this, which was the first, again, wonderful Mimi Pond, who's the graphic artist. That she did the cover for the first one is brilliant. But you have the briefest, I believe, bio in the book, and it says Jane Smiley is 6'2" tall, and 70 years old. She's written more books than she could keep track of and has enjoyed 4 husbands. Her children would like her to keep further information to herself. And of course, that's like everybody, for me, that's like the best blurb, not that you need it. But if anybody's going to go like, all right, I got to read all this woman's books because, clearly that's where she hides the good stuff is in the novels. Because everybody, for fiction writers, everybody wants to know how much of that is based on the truth And for nonfiction, everybody wants to know, well, how much of that did you make up? Everybody wants to know.
I agree. But, I also went to a wonderful school and high school, junior high and high school in St. Louis. And they pretty much taught me to be a good girl. And to admire and do the stuff that the other students did who are doing very well. And I wanted to be a good student there. And so I did the best I could. But what I gained from going there was a huge number of books that we read that I truly enjoyed. So when I was growing up, I read the Bobbsey Twins, I read Nancy Drew, I read the Hardy Boys. My mother didn't stop me. She knew I had a flashlight and I was reading under the covers of my bed at night, but she never stopped me. But when I went to that school, I was introduced to Charles Dickens, to Nathaniel Hawthorne. Most of them were male authors, I admit, but once I read those, then I could read George Eliot, Jane Austen, and that was a great education for me, and it made me want to try it out. So when I got to college, I also took a lot of literature courses, but because I was interested in the history of the English language, I also took courses in Old English and Middle English, and that got me more interested in language itself and how it works, and that got me interested in Scandinavian literature, especially medieval Scandinavian literature. And so I think for me, the turning point, even though I took creative writing in college, I hadn't really made up my mind. But the turning point was my senior year in college. I got up on Christmas Eve morning and I picked up Charles Dickens' last novel, which just zipped through my head.
Okay, not Barnaby Rudge. What's the one that he didn't finish?
No, the one before that, the one that he finished. It'll come back to me. It's probably up on the shelf, actually.
I should know this. I teach Dickens. You wrote the book on Dickens, but I'm a Victorianist. I'm supposed to actually know.
It's Our Mutual Friend.
Our Mutual Friend. Oh, I love Our Mutual Friend.
Yeah, it's a great novel.
Yeah.
And I got up that Christmas Eve morning, and we'd already done the tree, and there wasn't a lot to do concerning presents or anything like that. So I started reading it. I read it all day, Christmas Eve day, and then I got up and started again first thing in the morning. I read it in basically 24 hours. And I said, wow, I love this. I'm going to try this.
Oh, wow.
And, my mother was not the kind of person to say, oh, you'll never do anything in that. She was not the kind of person to discourage me. And so I just did it.
Wow. Our Mutual Friend, it's Lizzie Hexam is one of my favorite characters. And she's going out with that pretentious, deeply neurotic, tortured guy who keeps giving her, as so many men do in novels, tries to tutor her in what she should be doing. And at one point, Lizzie Hexam says, I am scholar enough. And that's another line that should be on T-shirts, sold at Book Passage, sold at independent bookstores.
Yeah, it's a great novel.
Right? It is
a great accessible, unlike some Dickens novels, which are a little bit less accessible.
Yeah, no, Our Mutual Friend is because there's all of that passion at the center of it. But you read, Our Mutual Friend, just for people who haven't had Dickens on their minds in a long time, is one of those ones that you can use as a piece of furniture.
Yeah, it's like 800 pages, but I just loved it so much. I just went.
But we fall in love. We fall in love with these authors. I remember having to read Middlemarch in 4 days, and thinking, I'll never do it. Was when I was at Cambridge, and I thought I'll never be able to do this. And then I got into Middlemarch, and I did not emerge. It was like I was living there. That was fun. I didn't.
Great.
I mean, and this is what I worry about, which we don't have time enough to talk about, and we have questions coming in. But it's the big books that I still want my students to want to read. I love the flash fiction. I love keeping everybody to 750 words.
Yeah.
Because there's its own kind of energy. It's oppressed intensity. And when you need to read in 15-minute intervals, so many of us have lives where that's what we get to do. But there also has to be, room for these where you throw open the doors and you sit with 800 pages and you just take it all in. And you've given us that with your novels. I mean, it's a gift. It really is. It's a gift. So should we take, it's 9:00 my time now, so 3 hours earlier for you being sick and you have dinner. So should we see what some of the questions in the chat?
I love questions.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I remember I was so pleased when you did the event at Hunter College online with Louis Burke-Frumkes. And we had a discussion. I was pleased to be involved with that. So I'm looking at the chat, and Carol, all right, my friend Carol is saying, Gina, what do the women in your family feel about your enormously successful and independent life? Well, my mother died when I was 16, so I have no idea whether she would be proud of me or whether she would be like deeply embarrassed. It's really a struggle. And I know other women who have lost their mothers at a fairly early age when you didn't really know them. My mother had been sick for a while. So and my aunts, those aunts that were, again, like 3'8" and 325 pounds, and they looked like ottomans because they were wearing floral print dresses at all times. And the only thing that was missing was the button on the top of the head. They said they were on casters, they moved easily around each other. What I realized, and I do tell this to my creative writing students, and I'm not sure it's the best advice, but I never had to worry about what anybody thought about my writing, because as long as I gave them a book and signed it, nobody ever read it. They really didn't. The trouble is these, I think people read because they're short. But so other people can get blamed. I mean, it's like I just have one essay and then an introduction. But my other books are sort of longer and sort of continuous. And I realized when I see them that there would be unopened on somebody's coffee table, and just like the spine would not be brought, like nothing. They were untouched. So I tell people that unless, especially for new creative writers, that unless your cousins have subscriptions to the New Ohio Review, you don't have to worry so much. So, Carol, I wish I knew what they thought. All I know is that the first time I was on Oprah, I did have one aunt watch me, and she said, well, the camera really does add 10 pounds. And now I swear, I do not write fiction. I cannot write fiction. I cannot invent. And that was the first thing. And I thought, it's good I have friends. And when Snow White, the first book, they used to call me Snow White, but I just got onto the Canadian bestseller list, and it was like there for 15 weeks, and I didn't know it until like a friend from Canada said, you're on the Globe and Mail bestseller list. I had no idea. And I called my father, who was very proud of me. It was a good father. He'd been a terrible husband to my mother, but he was a good father to me. He took on the responsibility after she died. And I said, Dad, Snow White's on the bestseller list in Canada. And without missing a beat, as if he had waited his whole life to say it, he said, well, Gina, it has snow in the title, and the Canadians are a very literal people. It was as if he had waited his whole life to say that. He came up with it in a heartbeat. And that's where it's like where you get your sense of humor. I was going to be plowed under if I didn't come up with it. So all right, Susan, who's one of the great essayists in the book, who wrote in Fast Fallen Women, wrote an essay to her 18-year-old self. It's a great one. And she says, Gina and Jane, please tell me about what it means to be fallen. So Jane, if you weren't talk about the way you have so many fallen women, you have so many dangerous women who are a danger to themselves and others. throughout your novels. And many of them have great senses of humor, and it's their wit that allows them to get back up, or that gives them a new perspective on what's just
Well, I'll talk a bit about A Dangerous Business. So I wanted to write, a few years ago, I decided I would do a sort of Joyce Carol Oates thing, which would be to write a bunch of murder mysteries set in California, but under a pseudonym. And the one, I wanted them to start when California became a state. And then I was going to do about, 10 or 15 of them during the decades since California became a state. And I knew that the first one had to be in Monterey, because that was the original capital. And I live near Monterey, and I love to walk around Monterey. And Monterey is extremely well preserved. The buildings are well preserved and wonderful and fascinating to look at. And then the landscape is also, I'm looking right out the window right now. The landscape is also very beautiful and strange, at least if you're from St. Louis and lived in Iowa for many years. And so I was walking around and I was looking at a particular building that someone, and I don't even remember who it might have been, suggested that this had been a house of prostitution in Monterey. And I thought, oh, that's what I should do. I should write about, my murder mystery should be about two prostitutes. And so I started out and I wondered why Eliza became a prostitute. And then I thought about her husband and her early life. And so I came up with the story of that. And basically, being a prostitute for her is freedom. Because her husband is domineering, her parents were very domineering and isolating. And the woman who runs the house of prostitution is a smart and kindly woman who wants to make sure that the women who work for her are safe and well taken care of. And she knows how to do it. And so the more I researched about the history of Monterey, the more I walked around, the more I sort of thought about the plot. That's how I got the ideas. And then, I thought, well, I don't know if this is working. So when I was done, I handed it to a guy who was a specialist in Monterey history. And he went through it line by line and decided what was accurate and what wasn't, and fixed it up if it wasn't. And so, yeah. I think he's the reason. I mean, it did win an award from the Association of American Historians for accuracy, if you can imagine. And I think he was the reason that it won that award.
Well, but you brought them to life, and you made them feel the sort of safety in numbers, right? That all these women together could form, a kind of union that would allow them to protect one another inside this house. That was much safer.
Friend, his name is Jean. She is a lesbian, and she's slightly older, somewhat bigger, and more, what's the word I'm looking for? More assertive, but also, more brave than, because she has to be than Eliza. So she's a good friend for Eliza. And so they make a good investigatory pair.
Yeah, that's absolutely, it's a terrific, I think it's a terrific novel. I really do.
Thank you.
Yeah, I do. There's another one of the people who work doing the beautiful graphics. She's done great graphics for Fast Fallen Women, Mary Lastly, did any of the authors interpret fallen women in a way that surprised either of you? Gina, do you feel like your students see the fallen women differently than you would have in college? I think that's an interesting question. And Laura Rossi had asked this about, is the idea of, what the change in the identification or the definition of the fallen woman between young women today and what would have been somebody when I was 18 than my students. And I'm worried about a drive towards a kind of perfectionism that I see in my students today that I didn't have. And that I think if I was, in the mid 70s, I mean, I went to college in 1975. In the mid 70s, there was everything was sort of being remade. It was basically the mid 70s with the late 60s, because I mean, the 60s when everything was going on, and in the mid 70s was just like we had fake embroidery. I mean, it was done by machine. In the 60s, everybody's doing it by hand. We just had stuff that you could buy at Woolworths that was, made by children that were being tortured in some other nation. I mean, it was not exactly, it was ersatz. And I fear that the young women and young men, but we're talking about young women here, are holding themselves to standards of certainly physical perfection. I mean, we all had the idea of who we wanted to be like, but I see that, because you're not allowed to say, I want to be pretty anymore. I mean, I was just allowed to say, like, I want to look like Annette Funicello, or I want to look who I really did want to look like, because that was as close as I was going to get. I wasn't going to end up looking like Tippi Hedren. That was not going to happen. And so, Audrey Hepburn was not on my list of people I could be like. But I see young women now aren't allowed to say they just want to be pretty. They have to be strong, and they have to be fit, and they have to be all of these other things. And it starts to feel like just wanting to be pretty was like Liza Doolittle or something, like wanting to just be able to pass at a party as somebody who could say aunt as opposed to aunt. Like that was reasonable. So fallen now might have nothing to do with sex. I mean, I said at the beginning of the book that this is dedicated to all of those who have lost their virginity but kept the box it came in. It has nothing to do with sex, but it has to do with this other idealized sense of changing femininity that seems to me to be fairly punishing now.
One of the things I like about the book is of the 75 writers. They're all different ages and all different kinds, and they have all of their own ideas about what this means. I mean, mine is about being old, basically, being old and clumsy. And I noticed that Amy Tan's, I think it is about a similar thing.
Right.
So what? Everybody else had different ideas about what they regretted, what they wanted, and I think that's the good thing about having such a large number.
Thank you. And I really did, I work to make sure that there are different voices.
Yeah.
And it really does come from, again, that there are people who are coming at this from various perspectives. So I write about the other woman and how you think, no one I know would ever do that. And it turns out that everybody that you know has been that at some point. What people do before they get married, they no longer get engaged, they get divorced. So like that, this is another ritual before people get, but I write about that. Bonnie Jean Feldkamp, who is a terrific writer and a columnist, wrote a story. She'd sent something fairly lighthearted because she's also very funny. And I said, I think for this one, I think you've got another story that might be better, not knowing that there would be, but just knowing that she had strengths as a writer that didn't necessarily depend on being funny. And she wrote a brilliant essay about, I'll just say, about her youth and about what she had to go through. And it's an important piece of writing. And she just, people really came through. And again, Carol, who asked the question earlier, also writes about aging, but she writes particularly about her husband having dementia, and how even if he doesn't remember words or he doesn't remember certain rituals, he remembers music, and that they dance. And it's incredibly moving.
That's so lovely. Yeah.
And then there's just other ones about sex. There's lots of there's
something about sex.
Yes, there's plenty of sex. There's plenty of sex, and there's a lot of laughter. But they all come together in these fascinating ways. Maggie Mitchell, Margaret Mitchell, I know her as Margaret, but her name is Margaret Mitchell, and she teaches at the University of West Georgia, and it becomes difficult to be named Margaret Mitchell.
Yeah, for sure.
Maggie Mitchell, and she wrote a fabulous novel called Pretty Is, which is it's a really, and I know she's working on other stories, and she's a terrific author. And I start her out. She starts out the book with a piece called Party Girl, and it's about
I read that one too. Yeah,
about being like deciding to break out of the good girl mold, but then not knowing what's going to happen. It's like letting the genie out of the bottle. It's letting the bottle out of the bottle. What's going to become of you? What, that good girl. It's like in George Eliot, if you're going to become, you're the good cousin that just sits and doesn't do anything, or you can be Maggie and you're going to cut off your hair and run away with the gypsies and fall in love with the cousin's, betrothed. I mean, are you going to have a life? Or are you going to be a good girl? Because good girls, we don't hear about them. They're the dates of their weddings and the dates of their death are the only things that are printed in newspapers, right?
I think when I was in the 60s, when I was in my 20s, excuse me, that was in the 70s, but in my late teens and in the early 70s, there was this sense that second wave feminism gave us of, go ahead and explore. Go ahead. If it's sexual, you can explore. If it's geographical, you can explore. If it's literature, you can explore. Go ahead and read the Marquis de Sade. Nobody's stopping you. And that was a great time to grow up because there was freedom, but also there was chaos. And because there was chaos, nobody was paying attention the way they had in the 50s to what people were doing and how women looked and all of that. I mean, I'm 6 feet 2 inches tall, which a lot of people know. So for me, the idea that you have to get dressed and put on in a dress and put on stockings, are you kidding me? Nothing fits, And
I'm built like my Ottoman aunts, so nothing fits me either. So it's fine because there's a magical creature out there that something fits. But it is, to go back to the idea of the fallen, because you're absolutely right to say, because of the chaos with everything, and especially the idea of identity formation and these questions that were out there. The margins were being rearranged. Everything was in a state of flux, and that people weren't paying attention. And now there is, and I'm worried about it. I love my job. I'm still teaching full time, but I used to teach Lolita regularly. I think Lolita is a fabulous novel. I wouldn't do that now. I would
have thrown it off the desk if I'd been your student.
Really?
Yeah, I can't stand that book.
You really can't stand? Okay, how come? You don't like the writing, or you feel like this is an homage to pedophilia, or you feel like
I don't even remember. I just remember reading it for 13 Ways of Looking at the Novel. And I had read the Marquis de Sade. And one of the things that I was amazed about the Marquis de Sade's book about, I can't remember what the name of, Justine,
yep.
Was that what he wanted to do in that book was to see her life through her point of view. And so you came to feel sympathetic for her. And before I read it, I thought it was going to be this really cruel, horrible thing. And I didn't think that Nabokov really paid that much attention to Lolita's point of view.
No, I mean, well, she didn't. I mean, yes, she was, I think, this sort of empty object. I mean, it was like him playing with a doll. She didn't.
Yeah, that bothered me about that.
Such a pathological narcissist.
Yeah.
That he couldn't care. He's just in love with the thing that he invented. And actually, Jean Kerr, who is one of my favorite humorists, was a playwright and wrote Please Don't Eat the Daisies.
Yeah.
Always, like Irma Babbitt, wrote every week. And I was often probably on the women's page. And she wrote a parody of Lolita. as something like for Good Housekeeping used to do a column called Can This Marriage Be Saved?
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
It was Humbert and Lolita going back and forth, and she's chewing gum and she just wants to like buy records, and he's talking about his passion and his whatever, and she's like, I don't even know who this guy is, he keeps bothering me. And it sort of boiled down the book to its essential, which is his obsession about somebody who knows nothing about. So I think that's right. But it was just the point of not being able or being worried about what I need to rein in about the books that I would otherwise teach. And I had a student who, I can't even remember what book it was. This was during the pandemic, and we were holding classes over Zoom. And she told me I should take the book off I think it was Stephen King I had on writing, and which I think is a handy book on writing. And she said we shouldn't be reading Stephen King because she read it and it's sexualized teenagers. And I was like, I really like this book on writing, and we're gonna stay with it. And I haven't read it. I didn't see the movie. If you're writing about teenagers, it's hard to keep sex out of it. And we're going to read these first 4 chapters.
Well, unless it's full of horses,
But I bringing up, talking about horses, I don't give trigger warnings. I think of it goes back to Dale Evans, right? I don't give trigger warnings because I think you would have to give a trigger warning for, for the Bible, for Milton, for Shakespeare.
Oh, absolutely. I wrote an article about book banning. And, if you're going to keep so many of these books away from your kids, you better keep the Bible away from them too.
Exactly. All of these things. So this is the part that makes me nervous. And that's what I worry about for the fallen, is stepping out of line of what is considered, again, politically correct. I liked the idea of politically correct when it first came out because I thought it was like being polite and conscientious. And now, but it's the idea of going, you can't teach this because don't put Dickens on.
Well, the thing about book banning is that it makes the kids want to read it. Sometimes
they're still, it'll be tough to get them to read. Like if we ban our mutual friend, we'd still
if we don't ask them to read something that is difficult and long, then they won't read it. I mean, I remember when I was in 7th grade and we had to read our first Dickens book, which I think was Oliver Twist. I didn't understand a word. And then I didn't understand the next one either. I can't remember what that one is. And then 9th grade, we had to read David Copperfield, and it was so long. And I thought, and I put it off and put it off and put it off. And finally, I went down to the basement of our house with the book in my hands on Saturday, and it was due on Monday. And I went zipping through it because I understood it. I had learned from the previous efforts how to understand his way of writing. And that was a big start for me toward accepting books that were difficult, trying to figure them out, and using them to learn stuff.
Right, and learning how to translate the authors. They're writing in English, but you still have to learn their vocabulary and their rhythm and how they present everything. And that's when you fall in love with them. I mean, and this is, that's how we fall in love with them.
That's right.
Meredith has a question. Hi, Meredith, another brilliant author. In the book, Meredith says, how did you come up with the number of 75 essays as opposed to 50 or 100? I think 75 was just... I can't remember, Meredith. I think it was the idea that it was a handy number, and that 100 seemed too even and that 50 seemed too few. And I don't think that I can't be more honest than saying
It's a great number.
I could come up with. That would be like,
it can be so, there can be so much variety.
And when we started, the publishers at Woodhall, one of them was a former student, who was one of the people who founded the press, and he came into my office and just said, would you consider doing some books for us? Would you consider? And so we came up with Fast Funny Women, because the humor stuff had been my way of doing things. But then that did so well, and people were so generous that it. And again, so many new writers had their voices for the first time. And they're new writers, whether, they might be, again, 72, but having their work in a collection that has an ISBN number on the back. Yeah. So that's the idea, just keeping it going, so that everybody gets to have this one big dinner party where, just like at any dinner party, there are some people who are sitting together and they're passing the plate between each other and they're eating, like, again, to make sure that they get enough in their mouth. There are 3 women crying on the veranda in the back, and they're reminiscing, and they're, everybody's sitting, but everybody has room at the table. Cheryl is back.
Gina, do you have any more, or Jane, do you have any more last minute questions that you want to ask each other?
No, I think we had a good talk.
I think this was wonderful. I enjoyed myself so much. I am just honored. And and Cheryl, you were kind enough to say, what are you working on now? I'm just put together Fast Famous Women. And because the books are now, I have people write to me to be in them. So I'm going with my bowl to some, but other people were writing to me. And again, it's a very diverse crowd of writers. I'm very proud of it. And then I'm also working on another book called Gina School, and where everything I figured that I will come out around, if I'm lucky, when I'm 66 now, so it'll come out in 2 years, that everything that took me a long time to learn, that I figure I could get out there early. And a wonderful, again, former student is illustrating it and is doing a brilliant job with sort of Edward Gorey-ish pen illustrations. So,
well, we have that to look forward to. That really sounds exciting. I want to thank Jane and Gina so much for being with us this evening. Again, the book is Fast Fallen Women, and Gina has special book plates. Yeah, there's a copy of the book, and Gina has special book plates that she is going to send a book passage, or if you would like a personalized copy of this book, you can let us know a book passage. You can come into the store, you can call us up. We will be happy to take care of that for you. Gina will personalize it for you. If you just want a signed book, then you can come get them at Book Passage. Again, we have the book plates that Gina is generously giving us. And I just want to let everyone know, we really appreciate you tuning in. We offer these incredible free events. This is amazing entertainment. You're hearing voices that, most places you've got to pay $75, $100 ticket to see. It's free at Book Passage. And we can do that because you buy your books from us. So I want to encourage everyone to support independent bookstores. We are thriving, but many independent bookstores are not. So please support your community independent bookstore. Support Book Passage. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Fast Fallen Women, it's on our shelves. Come get your copy. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Thank
Night.
you.